Episode 3 is finally out, and with that, the continuation of our journey with Mark Spector, aka Stephen Grant, aka somebody else, taking over the suit. So, welcome back to the channel, guys. If you're new, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe if you do, or not. I'm not forcing you. My name is Anthony22, and let's talk about Moon Knight. So, we recently got our third episode, and with that, a whole lot of stuff we got to talk about this episode. So let's get right in it. So, first thing I wanted to talk about was this episode. This episode. With episode number 3, I have to be completely honest. Now, listen, I'm not a diehard, I find everything good. If something is a little wonky or not exactly perfect, I will say stuff about it. And this episode is no exception. One of the things that I had an issue with about this episode was sort of the way things were shot. I don't want to get too specific into it, not now, but I will go over it later on in the story because it's going to basically come around. So, the episode starts off with Marc, Layla, and Arthur all basically in Egypt. They're all trying to find the tomb of Ahmed. And essentially, it's pretty much come to a point where it's a race to the finish, right? Who's the first one to find the tomb? Who's the first one to actually, who gets their plan carried out? And we start off the episode with Marc basically on a manhunt trying to find people who are related to Arthur Harrow and people who have connections to it and where exactly the tomb of Ahmed is actually at. And we get a couple great fight scenes on a rooftop. We actually get like a rooftop fight between Marc and a bunch of other members. And during this fight, we actually have a bunch of interactions between Marc and Steven. And the main thing being is that Marc is over here trying to get information out of these people while Steven is over here trying to prevent Marc from fighting. And it's actually a pretty good back and forth, something that we don't often see a lot when it comes to comic books. It's always something that, when it comes to comic books and comic book characters, they're always usually one-sided. They'll hurt you, but they won't kill you, or they'll just flat out kill you. You look at characters like Daredevil and Batman, who these are characters who will beat the shit out of you, but they won't exactly kill you. But then you have characters like the Punisher who will just flat out just kill you. So it's nice to see a sort of back and forth, and especially with one character. We don't often see that in the world of comic books, so it was really, really nice to have this sort of back and forth between Marc and Steven, trying to take over the body, trying to do things their own way, but it ends up messing themselves up. They basically trip over themselves trying to find out information about the tomb. And so we have that. We have a cool fight scene. And we see, there was actually this really cool point. So at one point, Marc ends up losing his realm. Or he ends up losing the battle between Marc and Steven. And he ends up waking up in a cab, in a taxi, and he asks Steven, "What the hell did you just do?" And Steven ends up replying with, "That wasn't me." Now, obviously, if you know, you know. If you don't know, basically, this is a tease of Jake Lockley. Now, for those of you who don't know who Jake Lockley is, essentially, when it comes to the Moon Knight lore, he is considered to be Marc Spector's third personality. So you have Marc Spector, Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley. And we haven't gotten a whole lot of him throughout the show. Actually, this was like the first sort of teaser in it by both of them saying, hey, Marc and Steven weren't in control. It's got to be somebody else. And we know that Moon Knight and Mr. Knight are just the suits that Marc and Steven wear. So what's going on? So it's pretty obvious that they're setting up Jake Lockley. Whether or not we're going to be seeing him this episode, it remains to be seen. If anything, they might save that for Moon Knight's next appearance, whether that be in another movie or in another season. Who knows? So we get that big tease, and then we move on to sort of the big party where Marc and Layla essentially go to this party where I forgot where they could find like this sort of evidence to point towards the location of the tomb. And they basically go to this big festival, and it's essentially like this private party with like, people having a good time. And there's this one dude named Anton, who is essentially the keeper of the information that they're trying to find. Come to find out, he's actually, he suspected that Mark and Layla were gonna pretty much turn over him. So he ends up starting this big commotion, which leads to Mark Spector having to unleash Moon Knight. And we get some pretty cool fight scenes between Moon Knight and the bad guys that they were going after. I love the way the suit interacts with how he interacts with everybody else, and how he uses his ability. For example, we see the part in which he jumps over, and we see his cape, and of course his cape is made to be a moon, a crescent. And then afterwards we see him use his cape again to block bullets coming between he uses his cape to block bullets that are going towards him and Leia, and then he ends up like deflecting it back at the people, which is really cool. It just goes to show that Moon Knight isn't just a man in a costume, that there's actually like powers and abilities that he can use, and it all stems from the mind of Khonshu and obviously the Avatar, which is Mark Spector. So we get to see more of this cool fight scene, and we get to see sort of the ending of it, which is them collecting these sort of pieces in order to form a map. Now, they end up getting these pieces, but Mark ends up realizing that he's going to have to put Steven in charge in order to create sort of a map. And they end up going into pretty much the middle of the desert, and they're actually in, I forgot, they actually were followed by somebody. They teased that somebody was following them. Whether or not, we don't know who this is, so we're going to have to wait until next week till we get to that. I have no idea who it could be. I just finished watching the episode, so I wish I could say something, but I can't, because I don't, I'm not, into watching those breakdowns, or those breakdowns haven't come out yet. So we continue forward, and we find out that in order for them to find the exact location of the tomb, they need to see the exact night that those stars and map were formed, which Steven ends up saying that it was over 2,000 years ago. This ends up leading Khonshu to pretty much rewind space, if that makes any sense. He basically rewinds all of space in order for him to recreate the one night that the map was drawn out. So doing so actually ends up getting him in trouble and actually in prison inside this little statue that we see at the end of the episode. But in the end, successfully, Mark and Layla end up finding exactly where the tomb is. So we have an idea of where they're going. But now with Khonshu being trapped, it's sort of like, okay, how do we continue forward with the help of Khonshu? We don't know how this is going to work out. I'm actually curious if Mark can even still use the suit. I'm pretty sure he could use the suit because he's still the Avatar. It's just he probably won't be having like special healing abilities or special strength towards him. Who knows? So overall, what do I think of this episode? So there's a couple of things I wanted to say. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to say regarding about this episode, and sort of just wrap things up. One, I genuinely like this episode. This episode was amazing, and it gave us sort of a better understanding of the characters, and it even gave us a tease of the other gods. We see the Egyptian moon gods. And actually, that's one of the things I wanted to touch on real quick. We learned in this episode that the Egyptian gods throughout the lands, essentially what they do is they're basically like the Eternals, in which they don't do nothing. But what we end up finding out is that they appoint an avatar in order to observe the things that humanity is doing. So they assign, basically, they'll pick a person, they'll give them, some abilities and some awareness of what's going on, and then they'll just let them roam free throughout the earth to just do whatever they want to do. And in doing that, the gods basically observe what man is doing. And they even state that they don't even interact with humankind. They just let it be. So it's really interesting that we sort of got that whole thing. And it seems like in the MCU, every single type of god or every single type of higher up figure somehow exists, right? You have Asgardians obviously dealing with Norse mythology. You have now Egyptian gods existing, and it seems like we might have Greek coming into the future. So like they're definitely playing with the whole things of like gods are in fact in the MCU, and not just one type, but many many types. So there's a couple of things I wanted to say about this episode. Firstly, this I have to be honest. With all this stuff that came out, I think this is my least favorite episode, to be honest. Just because the way this episode was shot and handled. When I was watching this, it really felt sort of out of place and out of edge. It felt like a bunch of pieces were sort of just thrown in together, and you had like what, an hour to assemble it, but you didn't even have enough time. You only could have gotten like maybe a quarter, maybe half of it. And the thing about it is because Moon Knight is such a complex character that when you're dealing with things such as going like in and out of personalities, you have different people taking over, you have different characters, you have different gods. It sort of makes it difficult for you to understand everything all in one go, and it really has to make you rewatch the whole series again in order to get things straightened out. Now, I do plan on watching everything again, but for the time being, because we're going week by week by week, I personally had a little bit of a struggle with this episode, not in terms of the story and everything. It just felt sort of out of place how they're basically throwing all these cards in, but not really doing anything with it. It sort of felt like, for some reason, it felt rushed, but at the same time, too over lengthy. And that's just this episode. I thought episode 1 and 2 were really good when it came to the world building and the character developments, but this episode felt like we sort of took all of those elements and sort of just shook it up and just served it to you. And I really hope that going forward with episode 5 and 6, we get to see a little bit more clarity on like the story and mainly the characters and the scenes that they're in. Because I don't want to, I'm not saying that this was a bad episode. It wasn't. It's just my least favorite. Not to say that I don't like it. I honestly did really enjoy this episode. But there are some parts of the story that are really, really confusing. And if I'm sort of having a difficult time, I can't imagine all the other people who are having a more difficult time and those who really don't even know what we're watching. So that's all I really have to say. I just hope the episodes are more clear and more straight through. And, we're in the last 3 episodes. We're already in the midpoint. So if anything, everything's going to start getting more clearer and we're going to start to understand the characters more. I'm still hyped for this show. Yes, this might have been my least favorite episode, but I still am looking forward to the last 3, especially to see, who's going to be doing what and the characters that we're going to see, and especially to tease of Jake Lockley, because that's going to be something that I cannot wait to see. But either way, my name has been Anthony Salick. If you did enjoy the video, you already know what to do. If not, then don't do it. But thank you so much for listening, and I do wish you all a very, very good Wednesday or whatever day you are watching this, and I will see you all later. Peace.